Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're looking at the U.S. government issue M4A1 carbine. A little bit of the evolution between the M4 to the M4A1 and the fact that the M4A1 has probably 3 different iterations with the same national stock number. We're not going to go over the specifics of the rifle because I have a 2-part series on the history of the development of the M4 rifle, and it has everything that has to do with each individual components that was changed on it from the original XM177s and M16A1 carbines. So we're not going to get into that kind of a detail. We're going to get into more is the U.S. government configurations from 1995 to today. And we're going to look at the question, is this rifle still relevant in the modern military market? Because that's the real question where we're at today. It's not necessarily a question of the M4 carbine or this derivative in general throughout the industry. We're going to talk specifically about the one that the U.S. government uses because the U.S. government is pretty far behind many of the other manufacturers who make the black rifle. The rifle that you see here, the U.S. government M4A1, this is the rifle that the government asked Colt to build. It doesn't have the refinements of the ambi features. It doesn't have refinements of Colt hammer forged barrels, but we're going to get into that a little bit more. But let's talk a little bit about the M4 carbine for the U.S. government. 1995, basically, we had very similar to this. We had a 14.5-inch government profile barrel, which we're going to take a look at in a minute. So in 1995, we basically had a rifle somewhat similar to this. The only difference is this has a stop mod stock on it and a bind pistol grip on it. Basically, what we had was a double heat shield handguard that was around a government contoured barrel. That was the first rifle that was adopted in 1995, and it would continue that way until right to the beginning of the War on Terror, which we saw the biggest introduction of the modern RAS handguard. Looking at 1995, you're going to see some photographs here of the original rifle. Basically, we had a flat top upper receiver. This was the first time that the U.S. government has ever adopted a 1913 rail on top of the upper receiver. Many of you who followed me, you see I do a lot of work on Dimaco, which I talk about them. They predated by several years the adding of a rail. It wasn't the 1913 rail. It was the Canadian Weaver rail. Dimensions were slightly different, but they sort of beat us to the punch on that. The 1913 rail did not exist here until 1995 on the M4 carbine. It had the wonderful burst mechanism. Again, that was something that the Marine Corps had cursed the U.S. government with the adoption of the M16A2. Had the 3-shot burst limitator instead of having the full auto, which fortunately would be rectified. You had basically this is a Mautek backup sight. Mautek is the manufacturer, however the rear backup sight was designed by Picatinny Arsenal, and Mautek was basically the primary manufacturer for many, many, many years who made this. It has sort of a reminiscence of a bomber sight where you have a adjustment on the left-hand side that goes from 0 to 600 meters, and it's adjusted for the trajectory of the M855 ball. And one of the other more significant improvements to the M4, which is worth mentioning, is the extractor spring. The extractor spring on the M4 was there was added an additional coil of 5 coils instead of 4 to give the additional extraction, which is necessary for a carbine length gas system. Carbine length gas system, you have higher residual pressures when it's unlocking. That way if you have a lighter extractor spring, there's a good chance they could actually slip off or rip the rim off. Well, to prevent it from slipping off, you're using a heavier spring. That's identified by a copper color, which that's going to be the U.S. government. Again, some of the parts that we're going to be talking about here, these are specifically to the U.S. government and Colt. Not every manufacturer you see is going to be using a copper colored extractor spring or a certain buffer or certain that. We're talking about the specific one for the U.S. government, which is very specific in their technical data package. There's a new polymer stock, which we see right here. This was originally we had a polymer one that was sort of reminiscent of the early aluminum. This was the newer stock. Again, this was actually created by Picatinny Arsenal. This was not a Colt design. This was something that they had wanted. It's a little more durable than the original one that they had. Now, the carryover from the M16A2 was primarily the lower receiver. The upper receiver was changed from the M16A2, obviously. The front sight base was changed to a taller F-Mark front sight base. The barrel contour was carried over from the M16A2 carbines, which is like a 14.5-inch, 1 7-inch twist. And again, the M4 carbine, as it was designed, it was not designed as an assault rifle. It was designed as a lightweight rifle that somebody who couldn't carry a full-length rifle but needed more firepower than a pistol, sort of like that of the M1 carbine. Again, the M1 carbine was designed for that kind of a use, not for what it actually saw in combat. Everybody likes everything because it's light. Unfortunately, when you have that lightweight, you give up things, which in the case of the M4 carbine, you did. There's one other iteration that came out in 1995. That was the M4A1 carbine. The M4A1 carbine back in those days, the only difference between an M4 and an M4A1 was the selector went to auto. They got rid of the burst on that one. That was primarily used by SOCOM for the U.S. government. That was pretty much the only ones who bought that was Crane out of SOCOM for special operations use. The M4 carbine with the burst mode, that would be the one that would be standardized for the Army, the Marines, the Air Force. That would be across the board. But the M4A1 carbine would later on, the M4A1 with the onset of the global war on terror would start finding a lot of popularity amongst the SOCOM community because obviously the carbine was lighter than anything else they would have. They wanted lighter. The problem with the M4 carbine was, again, it was designed for light duty use, so it had a government profile barrel. So let's take a look at what a government profile barrel looks like. Taking a look, as you can see, this is very similar to that of the M16A2. You basically have a lightweight profile underneath the handguard, then it gets larger to the front, and you have a heavier profile to the end of the muzzle. Well, I guess I'll just say it. This was a stupid design. There was no reason for this. The barrel being heavy on the front was absolutely useless. If a barrel's going to bend or if a barrel's going to droop, it's going to do it underneath the handguard. So adding here, this was just additional weight. It didn't give you any benefits for anything, not for a bayonet, not for cooling. It's not going to prevent, if you're, one of the comments that was made with the M16A2's adoption was, we did this so it wouldn't bend when paratroopers fell on it. Well, the problem is if the barrel's going to bend, it's not going to bend here. It's going to bend under here. So the actual profile of this was rather ludicrous to begin with. But this was the barrel that was being used. This barrel would come to find problems in the early days of the global war on terror. What would happen was, when it was being used by the guys in Crane, specifically at SOCOM, who were using higher volumes of fire, these barrels would overheat fairly quickly. When a barrel overheats, generally what happens is you have failures to extract. The cartridge case basically is welded into the chamber. The extractor rips the rim right off. And most of the time, you're going to have to take a cleaning rod and knock that cartridge out. And once it overheats, the gun's not going to work. So these guys were finding that. So Crane went to work on a new barrel that was going to meet their standards. That is referred to as the SOCOM barrel. So the SOCOM came up with what we refer to as a SOCOM barrel, which is, I won't say it's heavy barrel, I'll say it's a midweight barrel. This was a game changer. This one here, you're looking at a destruction rate of about 900 rounds a minute, 920 rounds a minute for as far as fully automatic before the barrel would fail. In fact, the barrel doesn't actually fail at that round count. When you fire this barrel to destruction, what generally happens is by firing that large amount of rounds, you start eroding the bore. When you erode the bore, gas actually escapes around the bullet rather than staying behind the bullet. And what happens then is it doesn't have the proper port pressure to seal the system to actuate the action. So that will cause short stroking. So this barrel does not blow up. This thing, again, 900 rounds before it will actually fail. And also, there's some other specifications which we're going to get into in a minute. This barrel was adopted by Crane first. And it's probably used from, I probably would say around the 2000 because it was part nearly the SOCOM program. And this would go on to be one of the game changers for the M4A1 carbine that we see today. So in 1995, we had the basic rifle with the detachable carrying handle and the removable handguards. So then we approach global war on terror. We find the RAS. Now the RAS system we see here started off with SOCOM as the Knight's RIS system. We're going around to the 1997 time period or 1996 time period. Again, this was sort of the SOCMOD era time. But it was for use with Crane. This was used on many guns prior to the M4. They had these things in the M5, which is the rifle length as well as the carbine length. SOCOM would go on to use it, and again, now it allows you to use vertical pistol grips. It allows you to add your laser pointers. It sort of was a game changer in adding force multipliers, if you want to refer to it as that. So once the global war on terror started, every single M4 rifle, whether it be M4, M4A1, would now come with the Knight's Armament RAS system. Now, prior to this, there was some other systems that were out there. For instance, the Armed SIR system, which was actually free-floated. This system here that's used is actually a very, very poor system. Actually, I am shocked that they still use it. In fact, this was supposed to be replaced. We're going to talk about the M4A1 PIP Plus program, which this problem was going to be rectified. The problem with the RAS system was this was a gigantic heat sink. It attached to the barrel nut and attached to the front of the barrel right here. Well, the hottest part of the barrel is right behind the front side post. So basically you have heat that's being taken from the front going right back into the receiver. So all the heat that's here is coming right back in here for the barrel nut. The barrel nut touches the barrel nut is attached to the upper receiver. So you're drawing all that heat back. Well, when you have very high volumes of fire, that heat can actually soften this aluminum to the point where you pull this, you're pulling down this vertical pistol grip and you can bend the barrel. That was known to happen on many occasions. This also added to the issue with overheating. This was actually, again, very poor design. There was no return to zero with it, the way that it was attached to it. For some reason, from 1997 right up through today, we're still using it. And after 30-something years. So it's pretty shocking that we're still using this, but we're going to get into that. But this is what it was. So changes that came about to the M4 carbine, the M4A1 carbine during early days of the War on Terror was the addition of the RAS system. The first time we started using the vertical pistol grips, and again, with the force multipliers that was added to it. The rear of the rifle, again, getting rid of the carrying handle and going with the backup sight. So far as the backup sights were concerned, the first backup sights were used of the Knight's Armament, their folding rear sight, which were very, very expensive. You saw some of the Arm's 40Ls, which were used as well. The Army wanted their own, and that's where they came up with this one. And this would be pretty much the primary one for as far as that you would see on use with these. Now, another change that went from the use of the standard government profile barrel to the SOCOM barrel was the change in the buffer. The standard M4 carbine would use an H1 buffer. H1 buffer basically because of the use of the M855 ammunition and the way that it presented itself, it basically slowed down that stroke along that cartridge. Longer time for it to get into place before the bolt closed. The M4A1 with the SOCOM barrel was very, very different. Basically, what the H2 buffer was designed for was to prevent bolt carrier bounce. What happens is, and there's a lot of misconceptions about this on the internet with a lot of so-called experts, they seem to think that the H2 buffer had something to do with smoothing out the recoil. It does not. The purpose of the H1 buffer was to allow more time as it comes back, as it gets a little more resistance, to allow that cartridge to be able to elevate so it would feed properly, because the shape of the M855 cartridge caused a little bit of problems with feeding with the development of the M4 carbine. That's where Colt came up with both the extended feed ramps as well as the H buffer. However, you only need one of those. The H1 buffer was primarily used just for that purpose of the use of the M855 ammunition and the M4 carbine. The H2, that weight had to increase, because what happens is when you have a heavier mass in the front, as we had to do with a SOCOM barrel, you have the carrier's going to hit that. It's going to, when it goes to strike the barrel extension, it's going to bounce off and you have elasticity to it. So the H2 buffer adds additional weight, so when that closes, to prevent that bolt carrier bounce. For as far as you guys who are using semi-automatic weapons, you will never notice the difference between the use of an H1 and an H2 buffer. You won't see it because the effect is seen on fully automatic fire. So basically what it's doing is it's preventing bolt carrier bounce, which will affect fully automatic fire, because basically what happens is you have your automatic series holding onto your hammer on fully automatic fire. As the bolt moves forward, the carrier moves forward, and it goes into the lock position, is where the rear of the carrier tips the auto series to release it. But what's happening is it's closing, it's releasing the carrier, but then it's bouncing off. And at that time, that hammer is riding it forward, and it goes back into the lock position. It doesn't have enough energy to set off that primer. So again, the H2 buffer is solely to prevent bolt carrier bounce, so it will work properly on fully automatic fire. So that was another change that was done. So let's look at the overall weights here. Now you're looking at the original M4 carbine, came in around 5.9 pounds. So now we add the SOCOM barrel, we're looking at 7.75 pounds. So let's talk about the benefits of the SOCOM barrel versus the standard government profile barrel. We talk about maximum rounds fired. Basically, what you're looking at for as far as cook-off is concerned, the government profile barrel on say the M16A2, you're looking at about 140 rounds of consistent fire before you're going to start getting the potential of a cook-off. With the M4 carbine, you're looking at about 150 rounds. When you go to the cook-off rates of the SOCOM barrel, you're looking at about 180 rounds. So again, with the use of the SOCOM barrel, you were able to do a lot more fire. You're getting a little bit more accuracy, of course, with it being a heavier barrel. But that use of higher volume of fire is ideal for the rifle as a combat rifle versus a rifle that was supposed to be used by a rear echelon troop who just needed to carry a little bit more firepower, who wasn't actually looking at being involved in heavy combat. Again, looking at the handguards, you're looking at the double heat shield handguards. Now, the double heat shield handguards on these rifles were horrible. They did somewhat of a better job than the original handguards of keeping some of the heat off of the shooter's hands. However, it couldn't breathe. With the original handguards, you at least had probably, maybe six or eight vent holes where the air could circulate around the barrel. The M4 double heat shield handguards did not allow any air to circulate, period. So it was something else that could contribute to overheating, and those would eventually get hot enough where they were unholdable. You couldn't hold on to them. So again, the RAS comes in around 1997. You're looking at going from 6.7 ounces of the double heat shield handguards to 8.9 ounces with the RAS. So you're looking at maybe a 2.2 ounce addition in weight with going to the M4 RAS system versus the standard carbine handguards. So now we're going to go into 2011. 2011 was very significant for the M4 because of lessons learned in Afghanistan and Iraq. Soldiers who would be using these guns in active duty combat, the M4 carbine basically completely replaced the M16A2s and the M16A4s. So the guys were using this lightweight carbine that was never designed for use as a combat rifle. They were using it as a primary weapon. So they would experience in firefights where you would have these guns that would overheat. You would hear stories. There was one during, I'm trying to remember what the particular operation was, where people were going from rifle to rifle because the rifles were overheated and they weren't working. Well, of course, this rifle wasn't designed for high volumes of fire. They're trying to make it do something that it didn't do. So basically what we see here is the PIP rifle that has the features. Because of those lessons learned with the weapons malfunctioning, the Army started looking at what SOCOM was doing and saying, well, maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe we need to design this as an actual assault rifle and not as a lightweight rifle that we're giving to troops to use in heavy combat. So what the Army needed was already there. It already existed, the SOCOM Heavy Barrel. By changing that barrel alone, you now turn this thing from a lightweight defense weapon into an actual assault rifle that can be used as a primary weapon. The problems with overheating pretty much went away, period, even with heavy use. This was a big game changer. So now the M4A1, which we originally spoke about, which was basically the exact same rifle as an M4 carbine with a full auto capability, now we've switched over to the SOCOM Heavy Barrel. We added the M4 RAS. The Army also made a couple other very, very important changes. Finally getting rid of that bullshit burst mechanism. They have now gone back to fully automatic. So now we have a true assault rifle again. We don't have the limitations any longer of the burst, which was very negative on troops who were engaged in urban warfare or close quarter battles, where fully automatic would be very, very desirable. So that was a major change going from this barrel to the selective fire. So what was being done now is the rifles were being retrofitted. You were taking M4 carbines, and now you're converting them to M4A1s. Now, again, M4A1s, we have now gone through 3 iterations of the M4A1 carbine. First was the original one, again, same rifle as the M4, government profile barrel, full auto. We've gone through a second generation, which was basically the addition of the SOCOM barrel and the RAS system. Now we go through a third generation, which is going to be the conversion of basically the entire fleet, which was supposed to be done in fiscal year 2022, of converting all existing M4s into M4A1s to this configuration. So basically, you would have a kit that would come to either Anniston Army Depot or any of the other Army depots, where you basically would have a new barrel assembly. You'd be able to use the original upper receiver. You would replace the trigger assembly with a selective fire group. You replace the buffer assembly with the H2. So the M4 product improvement program went to having the M4A1 barrel assembly. It was a new trigger assembly, again with a selective fire, getting rid of the burst mechanism. A new ambidextrous selector, which you see right here. There was some more of a desire to make this thing a little bit more friendly to left-handed shooters. New bolt assembly. Again, anytime you change a barrel on one of these rifles, whether it's an M16 or an A2, A4, whatever they are, you always replace the bolt with the barrel, because again, you don't know what the life is of that bolt, what it's gone through. So you're starting from two brand new parts, a new gas tube assembly, and just some miscellaneous pins and parts. And this was done so basically you would convert the entire fleet, getting rid of those barrels. Now, there was one additional program that we didn't really know too much about. It was referred to as the M4A1 Plus program. Now, the M4A1 Plus program was where the Army was going to look at several of these other issues, and they were going to make some changes. And these changes would start off with a better flash hider. The flash hider that we see on here, this is not a flash hider. This is what's referred to as a compensator. It's a combination between both a flash and a muzzle brake. It doesn't do either one excellent. Quite frankly, the 3-prong suppressor we had in Vietnam was the best one we've had so far on the issue rifle. But they had issues with troops using them to open up ammo crates that were causing barrels to bend, so it was more of a lowest common denominator reason why they got rid of that and went to the closed one. So looking at a better flash suppressor, a longer free-floating handguard perhaps would have been the finest thing that they could have done for it. So the Army had seen the issues with the RAS system for as far as the shifted accuracy, the overheating. It was outdated. So they wanted to correct that with going with a modern free-floating barrel. Most of you guys out there, one of the biggest improvements you do to your rifle is a free-floating handguard. It's everything. It improves everything from accuracy. You can put whatever weight you want it for as far as accessories are concerned. It doesn't affect the weight of the barrel. You can use your vertical pistol grip. You can pull it down, and it's not going to affect it. It's the best thing that you can do. So they put out a solicitation for that. I actually had a little bit of experience with that. I was working for Otis Technology at the time, and we got the solicitation for that, and we went to work on our own. We called it the FRAC, and that was going to be our submission into that PIP program for the handguard. The one that we did, ARMS, Dick Swan is a close friend of mine, and he had the patents on being able to attach the handguard directly to the barrel nut. So we approached Dick Swan and entered into an agreement with him that we'd be able to use that technology, and that was how we were going to base our FRAC on. So, we developed a very, very rigid system and submitted it. Unfortunately, the engineers at the last minute with the Otis group failed to answer the issue for as far as the addition of the grenade launcher. So the Otis one was taken out. The two finalists for that were AdCorps Defense and Knights Armament. Of course, Knights Armament you would have expected. Now, the push was going more towards the AdCorps. However, this program, like every other program, was canceled. They also wanted to go with a folding front sight. They wanted a longer handguard. They wanted to get rid of the front sight tower and have a backup front sight that was being used. And they wanted to improve the quality of the trigger, making a better trigger pull. And another very, very important part of it was an enhanced bolt. Now, the bolt was, I'll not say that it is it's a weak point in this rifle. It's not. The U.S. government requires a 6,000 round life for the bolt. The bolts reach that without a problem at all. Most bolts will get you around 10, 15 to 20,000 rounds, depending on how it was used. They wanted a much better bolt, one that would far exceed that. So several companies, put in for that. LMT, for instance, with their enhanced bolt. The Sharps put it in with their Reliable, all which are better bolts. However, the Army decided in the end with that it didn't offer any enhancements over the existing bolt. The reason was because they only tested it to 6,000 rounds. Well, if you're only going to go to 6,000 rounds, the old bolt is just fine. It's when you go beyond 6,000 rounds. When you start your testing at 6,000 rounds is when you're going to see the benefits of these new bolts. And again, this whole program was canceled. So as we see with the history of the M4A1, we go from the basic form in 1995, which it was at that time it was never looked at as a replacement for the M16A4 or the A2. It was looked at just as a specialized rifle for a standard guy who you needed more firepower than a pistol, but he couldn't carry a full powered rifle, lightweight. Focus switches, it goes over to the we like this better, it's lighter. It basically matches the performance of the M16A2, A4 out to 300 yards. There's no benefit to having a M16A2 or an A4 over this under 300 yards. Troops loved it. So then we go through the problem with They issue it to troops in combat. We find problems with overheating and things like that under certain circumstances. Now, going back through the global war on terror, the M4 was probably one of the biggest successes of the U.S. Army. Even though they were trying to replace it on many occasions, the troops had them. They loved them. One of the biggest problems that the U.S. government has is not maintaining weapons. And that was true with this, like it was the M249 Bravo, the M240, the M9 pistols. You had pistols that were used excessively and they weren't maintained, and then they would malfunction. So then, of course, your weapon malfunctions. You seem to think that it's a bad weapon. No, things just do wear out. We've got the 3 iterations of the M4A1 carbine. However, the national stock number never changed. The part number never changed. So you had 3 different versions of it. So now we ask the question, is the M4A1 relevant today? Well, it's an interesting question because you look at the operating system. We have a 1965, basically, when it was adopted, internal piston system. It's worked very well over the years. Now, however, with newer rifles that are being developed, there is probably 2 significant tests that this rifle does not pass, which some of the newer models will. Over the beach, which means underwater. If this barrel gets full of water and you try firing it, you're going to rupture the barrel. The other one is the bore obstruction test. If you have a bore obstruction, you're basically going to blow the rifle up. The external piston guns that we're seeing today, they have provisions on those which prevent that. So you have 2 major tests that are being shown right now that the M4A1 carbine will not pass, that those will. The M4A1 carbine is still going to be the standard, which any new weapon is going to be compared to for any NATO country or anybody who's looking for higher-end weapons. So the other thing which is significant here is the U.S. government's lack of updating. Basically, the rifle that you see here is 1995 technology. Nothing really has been changed in all those years, other than the handguard and the addition of a barrel. Where if you look at a lot of other companies out there, Lewis Machine and Tool, Knights, and these other companies who've gone on to make the rifles improved and better. What do I mean by better? AMB features. We have external piston systems which work better under certain conditions. We have cold hammer forged chromoline barrels. We have other material type barrels. We have more accurate barrels. We have much better handguards. We have guns that have free floating rail systems. We have improved bolts. Geisley, LMT, improved bolt carrier groups, much stronger bolts. We have better stocks. There's a lot of things that are significantly better than what the U.S. government has. The U.S. government basically says this is good enough for us, so we're not going to authorize any changes. So even for as far as the way the M4A1 carbine is a rifle, the U.S. government has kept it frozen in time to what you're seeing here versus what's going on. And what does that mean for the gun's future? Well, it's having a much harder time in open submissions for foreign military contracts because there are other guns that have those advanced features that Colt M4A1 does not have in the U.S. government configuration. Colt has tried to rectify that with the introduction of their M5. Their M5 does have those modern features. It's still keeping pretty much with the same kind of barrel materials and whatnot. It doesn't have any of those advanced materials, but they do have a rifle that will compete for that. But I think what's the evolutionary end to this is going to be the operating system. When you look at what's going on with a lot of foreign military contracts right now, they want rifles that are going to be the best. They're going to want ones that they're going to have the highest standards. And this is not going to offer that. At this point, I'm not an external piston fan. I like the internal piston. I really do. But, even I have to look at it and say, it doesn't do over the beach and it doesn't do bore obstruction. 2 issues now that are being asked about. As far as the rifle's sales today, well, right now, for instance, Colt is doing very, very well because we got 3 wars basically going on. We got the war in Israel, we got the wars in Ukraine, and you got potentially one coming up. Right now, Colt has a ton of foreign military sales, foreign military aid contracts for Ukraine and Israel. Let's talk a little bit about what those contracts mean. Foreign military sales means a country buys U.S. government equipment at a really cheap cost. So they're buying the U.S. government rifles, marked property U.S. government, at a very low cost. There's no competitive bidding. There's no nothing. It's a straight sale. foreign military aid, which is where the U.S. government gives weapons to our allies. Again, standard U.S. government guns. So those contracts don't require you to do any competing. You're looking at costs these days. Your average M4A1 carbine in this area is around $650. We look at it with Colt sole source. The same rifles are going for over $1,000. So once Colt lost the sole source, they went into the competitive bidding process. They were outbid by not only FN but Remington. Remington lost the contract because they won it, and then Colt challenged it and said that cheap price that you have doesn't include our royalties. So that was dropped. It was they redid the bid, but this time FN took the contract for the M4A1. So the primary maker for the U.S. government is right now FN for the M4A1 carbines. Colt still does get government contracts. They still get a lot of foreign military aid and foreign military sales contracts. I just tend to think that the future, what the future is going to be holding, is going to be putting you more into the external piston market. If you look at the HK416, the Caracal, the SIG 516s in these platforms, that will stand up and they are more durable due to a lot of these changes. So I think the U.S. government version of this rifle is becoming very, very dated and will be replaced. One of the last things that I do want to talk about, which has had a lot of effect on this rifle, is ammunition. The adoption of the M855A1 by the U.S. government. This is probably the last issue I do want to address because it's a significant issue with the durability and reliability of these rifles. This ammunition, as it was designed to have increased pressure so you could take a 62 grade projectile, run it at the same velocities and energy in a 14.5 inch barrel that the M855 did at a 20 inch barrel. And what that was done was by boosting up the internal pressures. So you're going from 52,000 to 60,000 psi. Given everything being ideal for as far as the test comparison temperatures and whatnot. Well, this bullet is also causing like half-lives on barrel life. Reason being is because of the projectile. The projectile is what's referred to as a green projectile, meaning there's no lead in it. So basically, you have a solid copper outer shell with a steel insert. The problem is when the bullet goes down the barrel, it doesn't crush the same way that a copper and lead bullet do, for as far as it's squeezing down the barrel. This is much harder, so it's creating more pressure to squeeze that down the bore, which causes that bore to wear at a much faster pace. Also, higher socket rates because of the pressures. When you look at the velocities versus these, you don't see much of a difference in the velocity, but to the way this projectile is to get the performance that they want, you're increasing your internal pressures. Also, it destroys sound suppressors, and because of the higher rate of fire that it causes from the higher pressure, you're causing bolts to break. So this particular cartridge is not good for any rifle. There's no rifle out there that's really designed for these pressures. It's also not a NATO cartridge any longer because this violates the NATO standardization. This has also caused problems with the M4 carbine as well as anybody else's. So as we look through this history, again, we're looking primarily just at the evolutionary development of the M4A1 carbine from what it started. This thing has served admirably from 1995 to present. We see this ludicrous next generation service weapon program, which is supposed to be replacing this. You're finding very quickly that it's not replacing it because there was a significantly, I'm talking well over 100,000 rifles, I think it was. There was recently contracts given to Colt and to FN for M4A1 carbines. Now, if the XM7 is going to replace this rifle, I would think you would be placing those orders for the new XM7 and not the M4A1 carbines, yet they're still ordering these in very large numbers for use with our troops. So my guess is the NGSW is going to fail, and this is going to continue to be our rifle for quite some time. I definitely see an easy 20 years left in the service life of this rifle. There's nothing out there really that is significantly better even for the U.S. government. There's still a lot of ways to improve this system, newer calibers. There's certainly, going with a 6.8 SPC, just 6mm arc. There's a lot of ways you can go. But for as far as a service rifle, we're going to see this well into the next 20 years. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share.